Conavi is a developer and marketer of medical imaging systems that combine both intravascular ultrasound and optical coherence tomography for market-leading, minimally invasive cardiovascular imaging. CEO Tom Looby is here giving an overview of the company and highlighting the multiple catalysts and opportunity for Conavi to grow its business rapidly. I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. It's Tuesday, June the 24th. Please remember, this is neither recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Tom, great to have you here.
It is great to be here, Martin.
This is very exciting times for you. You just raised a bunch of money. You're fully loaded to execute your business plan. I'm looking forward to hearing the whole story here.
Absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity. My name's Tom Looby. I'm the CEO of Conavi Medical, and we are guiding the future of coronary interventions. We design and manufacture a product that looks like this, which is an imaging technology. And as Martin said, it combines intravascular ultrasound. I will call that IVUS a lot of the time during this presentation, and optical coherence tomography. I'll call that OCT for much of the time during this presentation. But think of it fundamentally as ultrasound and optical imaging. We are the first and only commercial system to combine ultrasound and optical imaging to enable simultaneous imaging of coronary arteries for interventions. We have a first version that's been cleared by the FDA, also in Canada, Japan, and China. And we released our first product a couple of years ago to basically test out our value proposition in major US hospitals to get feedback for actually a next generation development, which we started 3 years ago and has now finished. And we are poised to submit to the FDA for clearance later this year. And as Martin just mentioned, maybe the biggest headline for us is we just raised $20 million in financing to help us with our program. When I present our company, investors have obviously a lot of questions, and I find them kind of centered around 4 different areas of risk. The first one is market risk. The second one is technology risk. Third is regulatory risk. And the fourth is capital risk. And as I go through this presentation, if you think that your questions or curiosities fall in those areas, I think that those are good guideposts for where we're going in this presentation and our company. So at a high level, the market risk is really low. In fact, it's a hot time in the market for products like ours. Our technology risk has been retired with regard to our next generation development. Regulatory risk will be low because we have a 510(k) application with our own product as its predicate. And then lastly, our finance or capital risk has been reduced because we have just raised $20 million in financing. So just wanted to point those 4 things out to you before we get really started. So we have a differentiated technology. We are the only ones in the world that do what we do, which is to combine ultrasound and optical imaging within the same product. We have a strong IP position that protects that. And we're deploying that technology into a large and growing market area in intravascular coronary imaging, which today sales for catheters account for about $700 million, but is expected to rise maybe even in accelerated fashion because of the preponderance of clinical evidence that's driving new adoption. We did test a first version of our product in the US and Canadian hospitals, but as I mentioned before, we're poised to launch the next generation once we receive clearance, and we expect to do that in early 2026. And then, as I mentioned, we were able to raise 20 million Canadian in April without warrants, with some very good institutional support from the US and in Canada. So as I mentioned, I wanted to talk about the market. So there are 4 million coronary interventions that are performed each year. All of them are guided by angiography, which is a moving X-ray taken from outside of the body. Angiography, basically shows where blood is flowing and where blood isn't flowing. You can see 2 arrows there where there's a blockage of some sort. It's relatively rudimentary information, and because it's rudimentary, intravascular imaging was invented to take a look inside of the blood vessels. They come in 2 forms, ultrasound and optical imaging primarily. Today, catheter sales account for about $700 million of recurring revenue each year. But as I mentioned, this market has received a lot of investment over the last decade, to the tune of 22 randomized controlled trials, more than 16,000 patients. When summarized in a meta-analysis from 2024 in the Lancet, it demonstrated that using intravascular imaging can help you reduce cardiac death by 46%, stent thrombosis or blood clots by 52%, and so on. That's very, striking, outcomes from the use of these products. It's led the European Society of Cardiology to elevate guidelines to a Class 1A. And then just very recently, the American Heart Association has joined them in elevating imaging guidance by IVUS or OCT to a Class 1A. So this is exciting for us because we know that evidence is the foundation. We're already starting to see the guidelines improve. And already physicians are trained on the use of IVUS or OCT. What they haven't seen before until we have come along is the combination of IVUS and OCT. And then we're also seeing evidence in different areas around the globe, including the US, for improving reimbursement to use these products. So to break down the imaging landscape a little bit, ultrasound is used in about 70% of cases with imaging. Doctors like it because they have a greater depth of penetration, which allows them to understand how big the blood vessel is from the inside, and therefore choose the right stent. And they can do so without using contrast. Optical imaging is used in 30% of the cases. It has a limited depth of penetration, but it has 10 times greater resolution than that of IVUS alone. It does require contrast to acquire the image. But what happens practically is they will never use IVUS and OCT in the same procedure because it will double the cost of the catheters used. It will increase the time that they're spending imaging, and that's just not practical within these interventions. So in other words, if the doctor decides that they're going to start with IVUS for a case, they're going to finish with IVUS for the case. And as you can see in this chart, IVUS does a really good job at the things earlier in the intervention, sizing blood vessels, doing so without contrast, confirming the presence of deep calcium, et cetera. But it starts to lose its effectiveness later on with some of the other requirements that require more precise and exact imaging. And for that, OCT does a better job. But again, until we came along, the doctor is not going to pull out one catheter and use another catheter.
Tom?
So along, yes, please, Martin.
These interventions, is that when they're in, what procedure do you actually use it in? Is it just during diagnosis, or is it when installing stents, or what is the procedure when these are used for?
Thank you, Martin. It's an excellent clarifying question. So you can use imaging in different ways, of course, but we are not used in the screening or say workup. We are used within the therapy. So we're used in the stenting therapy or the breaking open of blockages and things like that. There are other products that are used to help the doctor work up the patient to decide, do they need an intervention, kind of fine tune where they need the intervention. So those procedures tell you that what you have to do and why you have to do it. What we do is show you how best to do it because we give rich information inside the. So we are the first and only commercial system to combine co-registered and simultaneous ultrasound and optical imaging. I want to spend a second talking about co-registered. On the right-hand side, you'll see a blood vessel. This is a blood vessel that surrounds the tissue of the heart. Our catheter is inserted up through the leg, and it crosses to the far side of the lesion of interest. And so our novelty, our technology essentially has embedded an OCT beam, the optical beam, inside of the IVUS transducer. And they are physically locked and they rotate at a very high rate of speed. So when the doctor crosses to the other side of the lesion of interest and do what is called a pullback, it creates a video that allows the doctor to basically see inside that blood vessel. That is what is unique to Conavi. Yes, doctors have seen ultrasound and they've seen optical. That's great. They know the power of both, but they also know their limitations. We have now put them together in the same product, and we're pricing it at the same price as the standalone IVUS or standalone OCT products. We have an opportunity to charge a premium at some point in time, but in a very general sense, we're going to be right there in that band. We have a version that's cleared already in the US, and that's going to be our predicate. So wherever a physician finds himself within the intervention, they will have the best of either modality at their disposal. I wanted to show our audience here a clip from an academic paper that was published in September 2024. It demonstrates a lot of the same thing that I just mentioned, but from a different perspective. They were evaluating broadly the technologies that are available to steer interventions. And similar to what I presented, IVUS does a good job with 2 of the top 6 things and fails in the other 4. And OCT does the other 4 very well, but struggles with the first 2. But when you combine them, you get green for the top 6 things that interventional cardiologists have to do every single day. And I want to just point that out because there are other products out there. OCT NIRS has gotten some attraction from some, but when compared by these academics, our combination of IVUS and OCT was thought to be the best way to guide these procedures. So
And
we
Tom,
address unmet needs in several ways. At a very basic way, if a hospital is installing a new cath lab, they can buy our product and they can satisfy their doctors that prefer OCT or their doctors that prefer IVUS, because there are doctors that have maybe a preference for one or the other. But in the cases where we have installed in the hospitals and gotten feedback, all the doctors that started with a preference very quickly became hybrid fans because hybrid makes interpretations easier. There's just not data that's available on the IVUS side in some cases, and all you have to do is look to the right and get it confirmed or denied or add richer detail with OCT. And as a lot of people know, we have an aging society all over the globe, and because of that, when finally somebody presents with symptoms, there can be a lot going on in the vasculature surrounding the heart. So we think that having IVUS and OCT both on board is the only way to address complex patients. Well, at 2021, we started to test out our first generation Novasight at 7 major hospitals, 1 in Toronto at Sunnybrook, and the rest of them are pretty notable hospitals in the United States. And we received really great feedback. A lot of that feedback informed what we started in 2023, which was the next generation development of our product, Novasight. We will plan to submit that application in September, and we expect to get the clearance in the first quarter of 2026. What we set out to do is we wanted to achieve sort of the best in class for ultrasound imaging and for optical imaging depth. And we also wanted to infuse into this product a lot of thoughtful hardware and a lot of AI software-based ease of use features. We wanted this product to be the right one for the entire adoption curve, not just the early adopters that like new gadgets, but the ones that wanted this to be the workhorse and the easiest one to use. And then finally, for our business, we've designed the next generation product that when we get to scale, we have a way to get to really good gross margins with our catheter specifically, which is our razor blade recurring model. So I mentioned, so those are the first 2 risks, right? The market risk we feel like is not just low, but it's actually hot for the adoption of our type of product. Technology risk is really low. We've just retired all the technology risk from our next generation development. And so now we're moving into the next phase of it, which is the regulatory risk. We will plan to submit our US FDA 510(k) submission for Novasight in Q3. We will complete usability and system validation with key opinion leaders in Q4. We'll also publish some white papers and case reports from the use of our product at those hospitals that I mentioned before. And that will all lead up to the launch of our system the day or around the day that we get the letter from the FDA for the next generation product. We are contemplating doing a first in human study, basically to highlight safety and feasibility. We don't need that for our application to the FDA. And then, as I mentioned, we have our commercial launch in our first half of 2026. So, I mentioned the retiring of various risks here, and certainly there's more work to be done. But we feel like when we pass these next remaining milestones, we become a very attractive target for one of these cardiovascular franchises that are on the right here. There are about 10 sharks. They have many products that they sell into the cath lab, both on the capital side, but certainly the disposable components as well. And 3 of them have imaging to some degree. Philips and Boston Scientific have ultrasound. Abbott has an optical product. But again, they have one or the other, and we're the only ones that have combined them into the same product in that orange box. We think that when we get cleared and start making some noise in our first hospitals, we become attractive to these guys for a couple of different reasons. Well, first of all, for those who have imaging, some of the imaging platforms are relatively dated, one in particular. So we think that we can be a pretty good bolt-on for somebody who needs to update their imaging strategy. The other thing is that imaging unlocks the utility of other products in the portfolios of these cardiovascular franchises. And because bundling is the name of the game in commercializing in this area, it's likely that our product, our company will be picked up or will partner with somebody who has really broad reach within the marketplace. We keep track of what's going on competitively. We appreciate the work that our colleagues at SpectraWave are doing. They have a really good optical OCT product, but we're the only ones that have hybrid IVUS OCT. I will spend a second just kind of mentioning what our financial structure looks like. Our market cap is around 36.7 million Canadian. We do have some warrants that we brought over from a previous fundraising, the concurrent financing that we undertook as part of our go public last October. But as I mentioned, our most recent financing was 20 million Canadian without bringing on any additional warrants. We have options issued, and we have some good insider ownership. But I would remark that besides the insiders who have been here for a while, we could probably make a handful of calls and really know who most of the people who own our shares are right now. It's pretty tightly held. We have, besides the money that we raised in April, we also hold 240 of Titan Medical's IP from single port robotic surgery. Titan Medical and their team had done a really good job monetizing those patents before we merged with them in October. But what we're seeing is that there may be some additional interest out there to further monetize that IP. We've had some outreach from a few different groups. So we're going to pursue those, and that will help us extend our runway further to get through commercialization. And lastly, we have a royalty stream that initiated in December. We've had a partner in China that was commercializing a first generation product. They have recently designed their next generation product and had that cleared in December. That triggered the royalty stream that we will start to receive here in 2025. So we've got a great company, and it attracts great folks. Stefano is my CFO, who's been with the company for quite a bit, but we've been joined by Sumit and Bob. They bring in rich experience in developing medical device businesses. Amin is a co-founder of ours who is helping us design the next generation product as well. This is a look at my board of directors. The top 5 were, graduates of the former Conavi business, and Kathy and Anthony at the bottom of the slide came in from the Titan acquisition. All of us have good experiences building medical device businesses and eventually selling them, which is something that we are looking forward to do here as well. So that is essentially Conavi Medical in a nutshell. Again, I hope I impressed upon you that we have a market that is ready for what we have. We have a product that has been completed its design, and we are just finishing the final testing, and we'll submit in the next couple of months to the agency. Our regulatory path is really relatively quite simple. It's a 510(k) application, which means that we don't have to do a clinical trial. And the predicate that we choose is, in fact, the same exact product, just one generation sooner. So that should give us a feeling that it's low risk. And then every dollar helps, but raising $20 million during the tariff discussions was certainly very helpful for us to complete our program.
Since we sort of ended on the cap table and the structure, just a couple of things I want to highlight. The acquisition of Titan Medical, that was Titan failed to successfully commercially launch their product, and it was essentially like a reverse takeover of a shell, and you took on their IP. Some of it was monetized, and you have the potential to monetize others of it. It wasn't sort of a traditional merger. I just want to clarify that this was not a traditional merger of two kind of equals or anything like that. You took over their listing and their entity.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. As I was saying it during the presentation, we knew we had to cover this, but just to elaborate slightly, Martin said everything exactly right. Titan ran a process about 2 years ago to find a suitor to take over what is essentially their shell company. They had a symbol, and they had some cash in the shell, and it was attractive to us. We won the bake-off, as my CFO says, so we were selected as the company to merge with them. We completed that in October of last year. So we, consumed some of that cash. We have their listing now, and we have the IP that we maybe didn't know how valuable it would be. We still don't know how valuable it is, but we certainly have good opportunities to explore its value further. But I should say that we are not a robotic surgery company. We are not going to operate the Titan Medical business as people once thought of it.
Yeah, you're just trying to sell off those patents or license them out, monetize them on a basis to basically fund the commercialization of Conavi's business, right?
100%.
All right. Okay. And the 20 million you raised, how much of a runway does that give you in terms of commercializing Gen 2 of the Novasight?
Yeah, we had estimates while we were running the financing that with some non-dilutive, and by the way, we have other bites at the apple for non-dilutive financing besides the Titan IP. We thought with some bit of participation from non-dilutive, we can stretch to the launch of Novasight 3.
There are not that many medical device companies in Canada, especially, and I think most healthcare investors are more used to the therapeutics phase 1, 2, 3 regulatory process. And even on the medical device, there are different paths and subpaths that you can take. You're taking the 510K route. You have a predecessor product you're basing it on, which is your own. Could you just clarify, do you have to run clinical studies and show like the benefit compared to a placebo or anything like that? Just flesh out the whole regulatory process you need to go through.
So there's two major buckets, and I'm speaking primarily about the US system, but there's two major buckets. There's like a de novo or new application path, and those are for more novel devices, et cetera. And then there's the 510K path, which basically you are having the agency evaluate your technology alongside of something else that looks similar to it, right? When we sought clearance before for our first generation, we had to use, I don't remember, 2 of the other brand name companies as our predicate to combine them into our product, right? To have the agency understand, to evaluate IVUS and OCT systems for our product. In this case, our system, even though it's a ground up redesign, it functions very similarly to our first generation, includes all the same sort of tech, just maybe more refined. And so this is a 510K application, which does not require a clinical trial. It requires testing data and all that stuff to be sure. So it's a more streamlined version, and nominally the review period is about 6 months. Now, we have submitted what is called a pre-submission package to the FDA. We did that earlier this month, and the intent for that is to streamline their review even further. We get to understand the things that are on their mind and pay special attention to that when we do finally submit the official application later on this year.
So they'll give you feedback on your pre-submission, and then you know what things to focus on with your final submission.
Yeah, it should. even more de-risk, maybe streamline it. I don't know if it shortens the review because that's, depends on how much they've got on their plate to be sure. But we're
Yeah.
trying to advantage ourselves in every way that we can to launch as early as we can.
Yeah. And you're essentially just saying you're as good or better than the predicate product. So it's not inherently in a trial in patients. If it was working, if this predicate device was working well and yours is as good or better, then that's okay by us. Is that essentially
Right. There's not
the
there's not like a
perspective?
superiority claim or anything like that. The one thing I will mention is if you look at, sorry, I'm going to try to go back in time, right? So today we present, this is not completely the screen that the doctor sees, but today we present data as IVUS and OCT. We have the ability to merge the images into one, but we also know that physicians sort of resist that sort of computer magic until they understand what they're dealing with, right? They would like the option of having the computer do that work for them. So by and large, we do, I think, rightfully co-opt the rich preponderance of clinical evidence that are out there that suggests that an IVUS image is really good and can save people from dying and thrombosis and things like that. And OCT is good, but in different ways, right? So what we're not doing in this particular case is trying to prove that out with the FDA. They just want to know, is it safety and is it efficacious, right? Some other questions that they want to have answered. What I think you're getting to, and your question is asking, is can we show at some point in time is that IVUS by itself is good, but this is even better. And we have some studies that post-clearance, we will explore that a little bit. I will tell you that by and large, the doctors and the investors that we've spoken to, it's not a problem for them that they haven't seen a lot of the hybrid imaging data because you can see an IVUS image in an OCT image.
So efficacy studies on how well it works, like the charts that you showed previously, those are more not for the FDA, but for market adoption to show to doctors, like, look, this is why you should be using it. You'll give your patients a better outcome, essentially.
It certainly does help with marketing. I think that there is an efficacy test to be sure. Is it going to do the same thing that IVUS does? Is it going to do the same thing that OCT does as we understand it? So there will be that comparison. But absolutely, I think that people very quickly understand that where you have a blind spot and the other one completely covers, fills in that blind spot, and the other way around, you're going to have a better product overall. Especially if you're not going to, if it doesn't cost you any more money and it doesn't cost you any more time to use it.
Yeah. You mentioned both in the US and the EU that I think you said it had both areas gave it a 1A status, which sounds good. What does that actually mean for doctors or patients or for you?
You can matriculate through the various letter grades, if you will, from, hey, this is interesting to use, why don't you try it, to suggested use, to a 1A, which is the highest level. I don't know what the right terminology is, but the way you look at it is, if there's an adverse event or somebody has a problem and there's a court case, for example, the question's always going to be asked, did you follow industry guidelines, right? And right now, Class 1A industry guidelines are use IVUS and OCT for certain procedures, right? So this is a step in the way. It's not the only step, right? Reimbursement is another step. Making sure that you're getting in with fellows programs and training them on hybrid is another step. All of that is in the mix of market development, but it's pretty well understood to us.
So it's the best in class or the best protocol to use for certain circumstances. That's what the 1A designates.
Correct. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I want to remark, I don't know if our investors follow, medical device stuff so much, but a 46% reduction in, something like death is a pretty striking finding, right? A 52% reduction in thrombosis due to stenting is a massive reduction. And so, that's what these societies took note of and were like, okay, we've got to do the best. All right, we've got to write our guidelines around the best stuff.
You talked about the Gen 2 versus the Gen 1. It sounds like it's an enhanced version. It's easier to manufacture, so it's better margins, presumably, and it's better designed, so the user interface and so forth. Does it provide, am I right on that? And does it provide better information to the doctors as well, higher resolution, and that? Can you just sort of flesh out the Gen 1 2 difference a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a bit of a debate, I'll be honest, when we launched our product into the hospitals I mentioned. Some of the hospitals said, this is the way that we need it already. 40 megahertz ultrasound and the optical the way you have it. Because you have two, it's enough. We still have problems making the first generation to be profitable. But they thought that at least the product would work with the imagers as it was. Half the hospitals thought that, okay, well, that may be true, but Boston Scientific has a 60 megahertz IVUS, and you're going to always be compared against their IVUS. So we did strike out on a path to go and have the best imager, no matter what side we're talking about. And so we have gone from 40 megahertz, which is this image that you now see on the screen, to something that looks, more high res. And I want to show something to you. Apologize to everybody. So Novasight on the left-hand side, this is Gen 1. Gen 2 is in the middle in these three images. And this other one that we have labeled as state-of-the-art, state-of-the-art currently, we should say, is a major competitor that has a 60 megahertz IVUS. It's not a numbers game. It's not just you have 60 or not. You have to tune it and you have to do an awful lot of stuff to it. But I think that even the novices on this call can note that the stent struts that you see here in the middle, these white dashed lines, are just so much clearer in the next gen Novasight than they are even with the state-of-the-art imager in the market. And the similar story can be seen for our OCT image quality. This is current. This is where we're going. It's a bit unoptimized right now, but this is where we're going. And this is what we consider to be the current state of the art. What the doctors are looking for here on the OCT side is how deep can the penetration be? So they look at these dash marks to see how far into the lumen they can get. So we feel like we've got a really great success on our hand on the imaging side of things. And then, Martin, just to reiterate, we also wanted this to be very easy to use. There is a product in the market that's been used for 10 to 15 years. It's a workhorse, but it's low resolution. But it is just one that people can plug and play, and it's, they don't have to bag it and all that stuff. So we've taken a lot of those features and put it into what we consider to be a more sophisticated imaging device.
Competitors may try to compare, hey, our IVUS is better. Like, you have two imaging modalities at once, which adds many more dimensions to it. But you don't want to be like saying, yeah, well, you have to take second grade on the IVUS or the other one. Either modality is top notch as well. You get both. So there's no one can throw shade at you on any aspect, I guess.
No one can throw shade because of that. And now I'll just give you one other example of the hardware type of feature that we have put into this next generation. We have extended the catheter length. Well, why is that important? There is a box that goes between the computer console and the catheter, and this box is what the catheter plugs into. In many of the competitive systems, the staff in the cath lab has to put that box into a plastic bag because it is brought into the sterile field where the patient is. It is a cumbersome, procedure. It's also not even really all that ergonomically, easy to do, and the staff doesn't like it. So we really wanted to infuse this next generation product with those kind of ease of use things. And I think it's going to be preferred by the staff in these cath labs because of it.
All right. A question here from the audience. Can you address the workflow and cost savings to using chest IVUS or OCT?
So today, I'm speaking primarily about the U.S. Marketplace. The use of these guiding imaging therapies are included within the DRG, right? The DRG is a umbrella sort of payment. So if somebody has a procedure with these markers, they go into that kind of reimbursement structure. And that reimbursement structure takes care of the therapeutic elements as well as the guiding therapies and so on. Okay. So today, our catheter, which costs between $750 and $1,000, it's included within that DRG. Reimbursement, we anticipate it being updated because of these guidelines changes to further, let's say, incentivize doctors to use imaging more and more in their cases. Okay. 2 years ago, the US provided for what is called a complexity adjustment, and that was to use imaging within the diagnostic workup of the patient. But you can see that all of the vectors are pointing towards more adoption, more reimbursement, because it just saves lives to use these products.
All right. So what you're saying there, it saves lives, and they're not just on the cost, but on the reimbursement could be higher as well because of the greater value, so to speak.
Yes, so there could be a higher value. Today, it's already afforded within the current structure, but there could be more to it. And then the other aspect that the healthcare ecosystem looks at is like, does it increase any time? Because that's also cost, right? So
Yeah.
the way you use our device is this same exact way that you would use Abbott's and Philips and Boston Scientific and these other companies. So no additional time, so we can check that box as well. So same price for the catheter, same price for the console, same time to use. It just gives you so much more information.
Do you have any market awareness of one of the big players or a startup or anyone developing a similar, a dual modality imaging system as well? Would there be like sort of signaling in the market through FDA forms, or could someone be lurking in the dark and that just pop out in the near term?
We have pretty good intel. I mean, could somebody be lurking and surprise us? Perhaps, but we do, scan IP filings and hiring and things like that. We talk to a lot of strategics.
Yeah.
Some of these strategics, I will not name who, that they know that their product is long in the tooth, and it would be cheaper for them to buy us than to start a program of their own. Our IP closes out the co-registration. So co-registration for me is one of the main parts of our value proposition. What it means is the tissue you see on the ultrasound side is the exact tissue you see on the optical side. And that's very important in a heart that's beating, where blood is flowing, because if you think that you see something and you need to be confirmed with the other modality, but the imager is separated, it could cause problems in your understanding, right? So to get around our patent of co-registration, there is a Japanese company that's trying to do it from two different directions, maybe make up for that combination with software. But what we've heard is that they are working on a 40 megahertz product, which is essentially what we're coming from. We're going to a higher resolution, better workflow, that kind of thing. So yes, we live in a competitive marketplace, but we feel pretty confident that we've designed the right one.
And your Gen 1, it seems to work well and got good evidence to it. Are you trying to market and commercialize that additionally at this point, or are you just kind of taking a pause here, waiting for Gen 2 to come out, and then putting all the commercialization efforts into the Gen 2?
Yeah, we have essentially paused in the marketplace. We feel like we've gotten everything that we needed to with our preliminary launch. The fact that we don't make margins on the way that it's currently designed, and we don't have that much money. You mentioned that I'm flush with it, but I don't have that much money to sell catheters without a lot of margin. So what did we get out of those engagements? Validated the value proposition. Some of those doctors helped us design next gen, right?
Yeah.
They are writing white papers and case studies for publication that will help us pre-market before launch. So that's all excellent. And they're great spokespeople for our company as well. So that's a fourth major thing I would mention. But we are pausing there, and then we're just going to go launch. We'll launch into many of those hospitals when we have the letter from the FDA.
And the marketing strategy you're going to get sort of it's in 7 hospitals already. So you're getting endorsements from the key opinion leaders, the KOLs, and is a strategy to sell it to sort of the top tier hospitals initially, get their approval, and then it kind of trickles down to second, third tier hospitals as it's sort of proven by the leaders?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a timing situation, right? Because we want to launch successfully, and we can do that. We've got our first 7 hospitals that we know that we're going to go into, right? Pretty easy to do. We've got a funnel beyond that. To go beyond those, then it becomes another question of like, how much do you want to raise to build out a commercial team? And
Yeah.
one of the nuances that I mentioned before is that this area of medical device is all about bundling, right?
Yeah.
This gadget, that gadget, this therapeutic, this imaging thing, et cetera. And so as a standalone business, we won't have that much leverage if we have to build out a whole, commercial team. So we're going to go crawl, jog, right out of the gate. We'll test it in our first 2 or 3 hospitals, but then we'll go to a larger number. We have also kept a lot of those strategic companies that I mentioned before up to date on where we are. Boston Scientific has seen our images and are quite struck by how good our IVUS is, as an example. Philips, we keep in contact with. So what they tell us is we're a known entity. The technology is known to them already, right? IVUS and OCT, and can you get the combination right, and can you get it cleared by the FDA is a question. So once we get beyond there, I think that we will expand within a smaller footprint of hospitals, gauge the situation, determine if we have to go bigger than that, maybe raise some money to go bigger on the commercial side, but also have those conversations with strategics about a partnership or maybe an acquisition.
Do you think the major de-risking factor for strategics is the FDA registration, or are they more concerned about seeing that you can actually get commercial traction before they would want to partner up?
Yeah, I think so. I have been, I've had the opportunity to sell a few businesses in medical device, and you don't know, right? Different strategics have a different sort of criteria for acquisition. It is about de-risking, but some of them, need one thing, and some of them don't need the other thing, right? So, I just say that I sold a business. We helped to sell a business once where shortly after getting an FDA clearance, we didn't have one sale, and then we sold the business. Okay. It was a second or third product in our portfolio, so we were a known business, but that can happen. I think in our case, we get our clearance and we get to our first 5 to 10 hospitals, and we expand within them. It's not one doctor, but it's 5 doctors or 7 doctors. It's not a case a week. It is a good subset of their cases. And then we work on the algorithms and all that stuff, where they start to choose patients, and all that stuff starts to develop. I think that by that point in time, we will be in really good conversations with strategics about an exit.
Yeah. And then I guess once you start having conversations and you're maybe attractive to someone, then other people start like, oh, this is an opportunity we don't want to miss out on, and hopefully create that competitive tension.
Yeah, 10 sharks at least, and 2 acquirable, companies in the coronary space. One thing I didn't mention before is that with some adjustments, some development, we can use our product in peripheral vascular indications as well. So think about below the knee applications, right? We're not cleared for that today, and our product would need to address larger blood vessels, which we think we know how to do. But that essentially makes our product relevant to essentially twice the TAM that it is relevant to today.
What is the TAM as you see it now?
It's about $4 billion USD for coronary today. If many of the cases are guided by imaging in addition to angiography.
Okay.
So there's a lot of headroom, and while the U.S. and the Europeans have just recently elevated guidelines, the Japanese have recognized the power of intravascular imaging for a long time. They have adoption in their country of about 95%. So
Okay.
it's not like completely out of the question to grow within that TAM over time.
And what is the current adoption rate in, I guess, US and Europe?
We've got new data that suggests that we're now into the low 20s. For a
Oh, that's all.
while, it was in the teens because it just takes time for clinical evidence to develop. It takes
Yeah.
time to change, sort of the expectations of the old guard or the doctors who have done things a certain way for a good long time.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about overnight medical device company successes. There are very few of them because it does take some time, for the groundswell of clinical data and other things to make the market ready.
So what you're saying in the US right now, it's 20-ish%, while in Japan it's over 90%. So that is the pathway one could
Yeah,
foresee it
good
going
plot.
in the
Yeah,
US.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so the TAM is today's TAM versus the TAM in 5 years, which could be substantially larger,
Yeah,
presumably.
the industry reports that we have, for whatever they're worth, say that in a handful of years we'll be at 1 billion anyway. But we
Yeah.
think that there's a lot more meat on that bone because it saves lives. I mean, I hate to be so cliche about it, but 46% reduction in cardiac death post-procedure is extraordinary to me.
That does, yeah. And if a doctor's not using that, and they have to answer why didn't you do that?
Correct.
That's
Yeah,
that's
that's
a
right.
tough question to answer, I think. Can you just the revenue model? It's the razor blade. I guess you sell the machine into the hospital, and then you sell the ongoing catheters. Could you explain anticipated margins? How you see that working?
Yeah. So it is a razor blade model, but in our particular case, we are taking the market model as it exists today, right? There are other products on the market, and there's a way that hospitals are used to paying for them. That model is typically that the console, the computer system, is placed at the hospital for free, right? And then there's a catheter order that is signed. So nominally, if you want to, so 20%, 25% are sold. So nominally, you can think of those consoles as being about $100,000 to $120,000. Okay. The catheters range between 750 as high as we've seen 1,300. The range is explained by did the hospital buy the console? How many catheters are they going through? What's the stature of that hospital, as an example? That kind of thing, right? So that's where the range is. Um, so at volume, we believe that we can drive catheter margins to 65, maybe even higher. So it's not all volume dependent. There's some, workflow, supply chain things that we got to work through, because when you're developing a product, the first thing that you have as a priority is to make it work, to make it reliably, to get it cleared, to launch it, right? So in the next period of time, our focus is in on driving the COGS down so that when we get to more and more hospitals, we have those gross margins to throw off. But our target is going to be in that sweet spot of medical device between 60 and 70%.
All right. So were you saying that you essentially install the unit at no cost, but with a catheter order behind it and commitments to purchase catheters?
Yep.
Is that the model?
Yeah, and in the payback, we have a relatively conservative idea about how many catheters could be used. But even in that conservative view, we think payback is well under a year for
Okay.
that.
Okay. And what is the reimbursement status, I guess, in the US? You referred to that a bit somewhat, but
Yeah,
are all
so
procedures covered, or how does that work?
so reimbursement, takes its own path and has to,
Yeah.
they're going to factor in guidelines. They're going to factor in, the clinical evidence. They're going to factor in what do the guidelines mean to the hospitals that are now wanting to use these products more, right? They're going to factor all that stuff in. But it is associated with the other elements of adoption, right? The clinical evidence and guidelines, but it is sort of its own sort of routine. I guess if you talk around the industry, I mean, there's feelings like reimbursement could improve further within the next couple of years. I mean, it's very generic, very approximate, Martin, but with reimbursement, sometimes that's the way it is.
Okay. All right. And the question from the audience here, is there any current revenue from Gen 1 device on ongoing catheter sales?
Yeah, we had revenue for the last few years, but I call our business sort of pre-revenue.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of times when that sort of question is asked is, did doctors just use it for free or did their hospitals pay for it during that time? And they paid for all the catheters that they used in cases. It wasn't really so significant for us to call us a revenue generating company, but we did get revenue.
Is their usage rate in the number of procedures, I know, as expected, or do they use it a lot, let's say?
Yeah, they used it. So I think that we are a surprise to people, right, to
Yeah.
some degree. And I think that sometimes people think this is an IVUS case or that is an OCT case, or I'm an IVUS doctor. I like IVUS quite a bit, or I'm an OCT doctor. But what I saw, and this is more anecdotal because I spoke to all the doctors that used it, is that they realize very quickly the stuff that they're missing, and they become a hybrid fan. Now, when we didn't make margins, and so we didn't want to do a lot of big data on the adoption of it, right? That was not our intent for the launch that time. But I can really see this as being a ubiquitous device. We don't have a niche application, for example. In my presentation, my longer presentation, I talk about 3 case studies. The first one is calcified coronary arteries. That exists in 30% of the patient population in this group, right? Reinterventions is another 10%. Other things. So these are the mainstays of what interventional cardiologists do all the time. So I think we just need to get out there. We need to be more well known. We need to have available product because they didn't have available product. And I think that we can become that ubiquitous guiding imaging device in this space.
Normally, when you compare one device to another, like the two, the IVUS and the other ones, and the OCT, they're trade-offs to those. But yours has both modalities in it. Is there any trade-off between yours and just doing a straight OCT or a straight IVUS, or is yours just better than any of those modalities individually?
Yeah, look, the engineers that we have in our company have been amazing because the trade-offs, if you think that you're giving up on something in the IVUS image because you have OCT there, they have figured out a way that we do not have that sacrifice. Okay.
Okay.
So you could shut off the OCT image. In fact, sometimes doctors do, so they don't have to use additional contrast with a patient that may have kidney issues or whatever. They'll just run IVUS for a bit. It is as good or better, as you could see from that previous image, than a standalone IVUS product. Now, where the trade-offs come in is all of the delicate, intricate design work to get that to work, because essentially you have 2 sensitive sensors at the end of a very long, filament tube, if you will, that's spinning at a very high rate of speed. So there's a lot of know-how that went into figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, you took on it was a lot harder to get there, but the outcome is they're not
correct. Right. All those trade-offs took place in the design. What we're presenting is without any trade-offs in terms of imaging.
And then as well, it doesn't sound like they're trade-off. It's not like they're, at least initially, they have to pay more for it. It's comparably priced, so it's just upside.
Right. Yeah, so we wanted to make it simple, right? Does it cost more to put an OCT imager in the IVUS catheter? At scale, it really does approach to be nominal change in cost. So that's why we're pretty confident that we can go out there with a parity pricing model. But there is an opportunity because I think that people are going to gravitate to this device to maybe seek a premium. I really do think that that's possible.
One would think you're providing a premium product and service. Yeah. But it makes sense to start off initially comparable, take away all objections, and move forward from there. All right, Tom, we've covered a lot of territory. We're hitting an hour here, so I appreciate everyone's time. Anything we missed you want to highlight, or just any final comments before we wrap it up?
I think we are a diamond in the rough in the Canadian medical device area. I think that we have retired, the market risk is low. In fact, it's not just low, it's a hot market. Our technology risk has been retired. Our regulatory risk is low because we are our own comparison product, and we just raised $20 million to help with our program. I would love it if our investors that are listening would ask additional questions, follow up by email or call us. But I think we've got something great here, and we'd like to bring more investors into it.
Excellent. Tom, thank you very much. That was great. Very informative, and I look forward to getting future updates and as things progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.